right, welcome back. This is part two of marriage, sex, and alternative relationships. Now, I want to say that even though this part covers alternative relationships, there's definitely some other side topics that I'll probably bring up. I don't think I'll go into them, but I definitely do want to say that I don't I don't want to use any personal accounts or personal stories, and I will just link a couple of things down below for you to take a look at. This is important, but on some level, you're going to have to find out where you stand on this because there's really no books or there's really no path, so to speak. Everyone makes their own path, just like, okay, not like a marriage, but the point is you're going to run into someone else who's going to be like you, who has the same interests if you have, like a kink or a fetish that you want to explore. So there's definitely people out there, and you need safe places and environments to go do so you can go explore. Now, some people unfortunately get married before they find out the other person isn't interested in playing around. So yeah, that is just going to make things a lot harder. So I want to say that having knowledge of what else exists beyond a marriage is incredibly important, especially since I am seeing a lot that is happening in marriage or to marriage that is causing it to fail or worse, to hurt those who are interested in marriage that will probably never have it happen to them. So, and the fact that since I grew up with believing that I would be married and having a family and a house and kids by, my age, 36, and seeing none of it ever happen with the exception of just, the house and pets, it's hard. And many other people are going to be growing up with this or worse, not actually having any of this. I mean, maybe a pet, sure, but alternative relationships exist for mainly two reasons. Because you have an interest that you want to pursue, and it's something new, something interesting, or you just simply want sex. Beyond that, well, that's probably something else entirely. Like abuse, for example. Now, unfortunately, some people are abusers, and they hide what they do very well up until it's too late. And then next thing you know, you have someone with Stockholm syndrome. That is not a relationship at all. But mainly, for the most part, I'll be focusing on BDSM relationships, just because I have quite a bit of knowledge on that. However, I'm not really sure how censorship works with that, but bear with me as I'm trying to work through this. I want to say that for those who have interests, those who have kinks and all that, like for example, if you ever wonder about candle wax, you ever wondering about pegging, these adult terms, like, I don't want to just start throwing a list out there. I just want to say that if you have something that you are interested in that your partner, that whoever you're with, does not like or is not into, you need to find out how far you can go or how far they're okay with this if you are already in a marriage, because permission is definitely needed and not just simply important. If you're not in a relationship, then you just focus on safety for yourself primarily. Now, I'm going to throw this out here because this is incredibly important. BDSM, this touches upon more than BDSM. It talks about quite a bit, in the books it talks about, but in 50 Shades of Grey, the movies, I've only seen the first movie, so I can't say anything about the second or third, except I heard in one of the other movies, the two characters end up getting married. So let's see here. I don't like using this as an example, but since it kind of took the world by storm a couple of years ago, I just want to say that it got quite a few people up in shock or an uproar, because there's a lack of safety and there's a prominent feature of abuse and issues that were featured but never really taken care of. Like, what's his name? Jonathan Gray? I'm looking up right now because I can't remember. I just remember Gray. I don't remember anything else here. This is not fun. Let's see here. I don't remember the woman's name. Anyway, moving on. The two characters there, one of them's name is Gray, and I think it's Jonathan Gray. But either way, there's a focus on abuse and a lack of safety, and that's both one of the main reasons why the BDSM community and the adult community as a whole just kind of does not like it. Now, here's the thing. Not everyone's going to be rich like Gray. They're not going to be a millionaire. They're not going to have a room full of toys up on the wall that is mounted. And they won't necessarily have the time during the day to just simply set aside for quote-unquote playing. Playing is important as well as flirting and taking your partner out on a date. Something to help keep that spark alive, to help keep the interest there. Now, it looks differently inside of a marriage than it does outside of a marriage, from what I have put together by all accounts. Inside of a marriage, it's usually just called a date. Taking your wife out, taking your wife out on a date. And the wife would just look all pretty. That's healthy by many standards. However, kids are usually in the picture there. For alternative relationships, kids are usually not in the picture. Also, I want to throw this out because this is incredibly important. When it comes down to the church, they put a clear emphasis on having God be present in the relationship. Building the relationship with God there in midst of both of the people. Now, whether or not this happens in the beginning where the relationship is actually built with God there at the center, or if one party comes to know Christ and then God is included, a lot of things change depending upon what mistakes were made and whether or not people were, joined together, being of the same yoke, quote unquote, of the same faith. But for those who, for alternative relationships, faith and religion is not, it's usually just ignored. It's not a requirement or anything. You just have to have some of the same interest in kinks and fetishes for you to, or you just like the other person and you just want to be with them. As far as same-sex relationships, I'll cover them last. I want to say that those who in the church who have talked about relationships generally stick to marriage and dating. They don't cover anything else, which actually has bothered me tremendously. And that's part of the reason why I'm doing this. Censorship itself just means I have to be bland and boring. I can't just be like innovative and talking about, I can, but I can't just talk about some of the terms, just using them as they are. Frustrating. Anyway, I was going back to 50 Shades of Grey here because it's important. Seeing how things are done properly is definitely one of the pluses with like the toys and the fact that things are erotic and interesting there. I will say that the candle wax play and all that, like some of it's really well done. If you're in, so whatever relationship you're interested in or you're pursuing, if there is any sort of sexual play there, as I already mentioned, you want to focus on safety. But the next thing is, what exactly is the other person comfortable doing or allowing to happen? Now, when it comes down to the BDSM community, it usually is divided into three parts: those who are submissive, those who are dominant, and those who are a switch. Now, you could get a little bit more complicated with masters and mistresses and all of that, but in short, you're going to have one person in charge, or you're going to just take turns of being in charge. And there's usually a safe word involved, and if there's not, you need to look into what exactly is the other person doing. You don't want to exactly have any sort of abuse start because of the relationship. I mean, Stockholm syndrome is a real, sincere problem. However, I don't know how widespread that actual problem is, just because these relationships are kept private, much more so since social media is present. Now, some people are very much like they want to post about the relationship and just give update statuses, and that concerns me because relationships, if they are open to the world without boundaries, means someone will always be hurt, and it's not personal any longer. I value intimacy, so for me, I would never be talking about things that I did with the other person that I was in a relationship with, just because it's a violation of that. Now, you can take pictures of where you're at and kind of like keep them off to yourself, sure, but posting stuff online publicly, no, definitely not. Let me see here. So when it comes down to it, I know this is, you want to keep things clean too. How do I divide this? So obviously you keep the tools, equipment, the toys, keep them clean, but you want to make sure if you are going with the other person out in public, you want to make sure that things are also clean there as well, just to avoid any unwanted issues or drama. Now, obviously, this goes without saying, if there's anything one person wants, the other person should listen to, because this is important. Or this is something that falls under the whole, like, kink fetish, like they want to do. Alright, moving on here. There was something that was on the back of my mind as far as what this goes. I'm trying to remember what it was. I want to say that there are sometimes agreements set beforehand because it's done for money. So you could have contracts that are put down in place before it. So you could have relationships that are basically, they either are contracts or there's contracts that are heavily involved, usually for safety. Now, there could also be payments, for money as well. I don't want to simply just say, this is like an escort. You're just going to go pay for their time, and buy. That's not a relationship. But you could have something set up in more or less on stone with permission. That is needed just because of false allegations that are made that could, end your career and livelihood, or worse. Have you set up to go pay a monthly child support to someone that you were never romantically interested in to begin with? That's important. I don't think there's anything else that I can really mention about 50 Shades of Grey. Now, obviously, if you're going to be investing any sort of time into this, you want to check out the trailers, check out the reviews. You want to see what other people say, what they think. Now, because this movie is a fantasy. Now, the framework that is set in place there is not really healthy, just because it's two people meeting together with their own issues and problems, and these issues never really get resolved from what I've heard about in the second and third movies. Now, I don't actually know if they ever get resolved. They're just introduced in the first movie, and that's it. Let me see here. Yep, your health is important. Health tips, yep. Interestingly note, this is a side topic real quick, but flogging can actually help if you have fibromyalgia. If you have issues with your nerves in your back. I can't remember the fibro something. So flogging can actually help you with the nerves in your back, yes. Just a small tip that I found out. Very interesting. Let's see. consent and abuse. Without consent, it is abuse. Plain and simple. So, dominating someone because you want something to happen is completely wrong on so many levels. Now, if you care about the other person and you still want to be in charge, there are steps to take that path. Now, that's the thing that separates one of the things that separates alternative relationships from marriage. Not just simply faith and belief and all that, but children, the lack of children. I already mentioned that. But also, someone's in charge and the other person allows them to be in charge. Or, like I said, if there are switches, two people, they just take turns. So that can extend from just play to actually personal life, like living with. Because I've heard and I've read stories of people living together and taking their relationship to the next level, where they're actually living together. Now, there's a lot that actually is personal there, so keep that in mind. If you're going to make any sort of judgment call, keep that in mind that this is their relationship. So it is between those two individuals, no matter how right or how wrong it is. Outside of abuse, that is. Things that have happened are between these two consenting adults. Usually that is never touched upon in marriage, and it's usually like decorating issues, financial issues. One person wants things to be this way, or they want them to be that way. I mean, with food, like I said, mainly with food and decorations, and things being left around or being put away in a certain way. It never goes anywhere beyond that from what I've understood. Also, communication issues do fall in there somewhere as well. Let me see. I am moving on here. As far as relationships that are just as deep as marriage, but, outside of marriage, I would have to say coloring inside of BDSM is something that is supposed to be very intimate, and the way it's done is always going to be a little bit different just because there's no set pattern for any of this. That is one word of warning I want to throw out there. There's no set path for alternative relationships. So you never really want to force anything. Now, if things pop up naturally and you want to explore it, go for it. Just make sure you focus on safety and permission, just because things are, still being felt out. But if things do happen naturally, that can be explored. I don't want to say it should be explored, but, there's much that can be explored. Now, just because you can explore it doesn't mean there won't be consequences. Paul in the Bible says that, not everything that can happen should happen. Not everything that... I'm forgetting the exact verse, but it's basically just because it's there doesn't mean you should do it. Now, also, keep in mind, you could go too far and something happens. So that is also something that is common in the beginning of the relationship itself. You just, overstep, you go too far, you don't talk to the other person, you just jump through a couple hoops before you realize what actually happened. You're like, oops. Yeah. So that could do irreparable damage and harm to the other person and as well as to the relationship itself. That's why safety is important, because it helps to cover up any potential mistakes and problems. Alright, moving on. Or should I say, going back to collaring, since that's something that I had looked into quite years and years ago. This isn't any time recent, but this was years ago. I was in a relationship with someone, and let's just say the Army was kind of got in the way of it all, for better. But at the same time, when I left the Army, I left that lifestyle as well. I left all of that behind, and I left her behind, and I regret it. I really regret just not... I regret leaving things the way I left them, and I really wish that I had done a better job. But it's more because she ended up running into someone else after me who ended up permanently scarring her, damaging her. I don't really want to talk about it, but just I never actually got her permission to talk about it either. But all I'm just going to say is the guy broke her, and she told me what happened, and it just crushed me. Now, it. I'm glad that she did it, even though it did crush me, because it actually took her off the pedestal, and I stopped, comparing every other woman to her. So that was actually good. But other than that, it was pretty brutal hearing the details. And she's, as far as I know, she's happy with her grandkids and with the other loved ones that she was around. I don't know if she meant like relatives or cousins or anything like that. I really don't know. I didn't ask for the details, and I do respect her privacy. Yeah. But as I said about collaring, because it was something that had popped up between me and her that was very intimate, that we care about each other. Collaring is something that can be done between two individuals with other people there, and there's different ceremonies because there's no set path, there's no set pattern, it's all custom, it's all personal. Now, it should be intimate. It shouldn't be public at all in any way, shape, or form. But, some people like having open relationships and they can make those work. That's a different type of trust that is actually there. Different type of trust, different type of boundaries. Now, in some cases, there literally is no boundaries. There's just like an agreement or two. Like, don't tell me anything. I don't want to know. Yeah. I mean, I'm moving away from that. I don't like talking about open relationships, but they exist and people love them, people like them, and they do. However, they're known to fail within weeks, if not a month or two. And if it lasts beyond a year, you may want to actually start asking questions because it may turn into an affair. That actually falls under friends with benefits as well. If anything lasts beyond a year, start asking questions and then making sure everything's settled before continuing further. And this is purely for safety, especially if kids are in it. God knows, like, if kids are in the mix of any of this, you keep things on the down low and keep them in the next room or further, because any sort of adult content or anything could mess the children up permanently. And this ties in with abusive partners and these kids being abused somehow, shape, or form, because fetishes and kinks, unhealthy individuals can spiral out of control, and as their appetite grows, they can actually go take steps that they normally never would have if this appetite was never fed to begin with. Now, there are some cases where I've heard and I've read about these boys who are charged with crimes as an adult, even though they were like 16 and 17, and what they did was not something that they should have ever known. But in fact, they were victims of abuse themselves, and they just apply that to the other person. I'm not going into details there, and that's not important. This is just basically side effects that you want to be careful about. Now, again, actually, I didn't talk about this, but the church holds marriage up as a standard because it's a healthy, safe, intimate environment, or at least that's the idea anyway. Because there's protection for everyone around, there is a safe space, there's room for growth, maturity, all of that. And this is needed for any kind of relationship, especially if there's ones with kids. However, the focus isn't on sex or toys or playing around or kinks or fetishes or anything like that. There's very little of the adult world there. I mean, there should be something there just for the spark, the romance, sure, but that's going to look differently between the couples and all that. On top of that, I want to say that marriages usually stabilize because, yeah, you know, one party focuses on the other, or they both focus on each other. So it is, at the very least, a 50-50. It's going to be 50-50 at the very least. At the very most, it's going to be 125% for both sides, where it's constantly putting the other person first in the life, as well as, their safety and all that. Their wants, their needs, protection, and it's very much focusing on qualities that are healthy and should be pursued. But obviously, if you're, for this relationships outside of marriage, that's not the focus at all. At least not from my understanding. Anyway, I keep straying from callers. I'm trying to go back into that here. Let's see here. Callers. Why am I not seeing anything here? I was looking this. I wouldn't really call this loveless. I am trying to look a couple things up here, alright? Just because this is something I haven't really thought about in a very long time. I wouldn't say years, but I just want to say that was on the back of my mind. And roughly somewhere between now and 6 months ago, I actually decided to put this off because since I haven't had like a relationship, a relationship that I'd want, since there's been no relationships with other women, I just kind of put it off. I just said, you know what, I'm not going to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. So yeah, let's see here. So collaring is a formal ceremony, but it's done differently for each person. You can look this up on Wikimania. I'll link that down below. So the process is to formally make, to announce that they are theirs. Because again, this ties back to, one person is the dominant who's in charge and the other person is submissive. There's different terms for like slave or pet. Now it's purely for play, but if there is anything official, then it would not be for play. It would be more or less permanent. Because collaring is meant to be permanent in the way that marriage is. In some cases, for life, because there's no out. Like with a marriage, with the contract, you could just simply get a divorce. It's not really like that with collaring. Now, you can actually take it off and, break it and, get rid of, just leave the relationship. In some cases, that's not the case, is because the love is deep enough that it is meant to be permanent, so therefore it is very intimate. I've never actually heard of any sort of open relationships ever being that intense or intimate. They never last in the same way. Now, if they do last in the same way, I've heard of some very interesting things, but I never actually looked into them anytime, I never looked into them and I never followed them. So, I've heard some stories of, this one guy with, 10 women, and they were, living together with their own, issues and problems, but they're still together. To my knowledge, they're actually offline. They're not on the internet, and there's just, a story on them. So maybe there's nothing further on them. But they have multiple kids. Anyway, back to collaring. This is a very hard, difficult topic to talk about. Now, for good reason. There's a lot of sexual stuff here that is actively explored, and not just simply, brushed over and assumed, like when the church talks about, men and women and relationships and bedroom activities, they just stop at sex and leave it there. They never go into details. Anything that's within the adult community and adult content loves the details. They absolutely love them. They just go crazy over it. Now, that is exactly what I'm trying to avoid, because for two reasons. Not just because of censorship, but because you never know what happens when you stoke someone's sex engine up, and things can go way beyond control to the point where these people have never experienced this before and they just go crazy in a sexual way, and it usually ends up with a lot of mistakes and problems. That's just putting it mildly. Let's see here. Social significance. Colors have varying degrees of significance for people in the leather community. I'm pointing this out because collars itself can represent different things, not just simply saying, hey, I'm someone else's. Yeah. Let me see here. It's potentially tangible symbol of relationship itself. Yeah. A lockable collar may further symbolize a transfer of power from the submissive to the dominant holding the key. Transfer of power. And I believe there's some very interesting variations of that as well. Reverse power play. Reverse power. It's basically the opposite of that. There's a word for it. I can't remember it. Let me see here. Some submissives do not wear their collars all the time. Yeah, obviously. You work in the retail or in the food industry, it's going to look weird as anything. It's going to cause problems and issues. But not sufficiently letting go. Particularly if worn by men. Men wanting to have women in charge, to be their mistress or whatever, that's very interesting because that can delve into a financial side where some men absolutely love having women spend their money. I've heard of some very, that's actually apparently on the rise. I don't think that's healthy in any way, shape, or form because you're enabling women who want to call themselves mistress, black, or whatever. I'm throwing that out there. There's no relationship to anyone who's ever named that. I just threw it out there. I forget that what particular aspect of being a mistress that actually entails, but that's not healthy. Fiefdomen. Well, whatever. It's like a dominatrix in a sense where women do control men and they're paid to do so. And there's a particular emphasis on using, finances and resources of the man. And apparently these men get off on that. It gets them excited and all that. I don't think that's healthy. But you know what? It's their own relationship, so I'll just mention out there just because it falls under alternative relationships. Now, the focus there does not seem to be particularly only to the money. It could be to other parts as well. However, the fact that it is a transfer of power is something that I'm adding simply because I'm at this part here. Let me see here. It doesn't matter what the collars are made of. It just matters why they're made and what the occasion or what the occasion is, what the relationship is, and all that. BDSM itself has gone back way past. It's definitely been around since the 70s for sure, but it's very discreet and there's very little that you can find beyond that, I believe, simply because the lack of the internet was, the things weren't really recorded, and if they were recorded, they weren't put online. But the fact is, this has gone back for years. I'm reading up on some stuff here. They call it a D's relationship, D/S, dominant/submissive. The practice of joint collaring has emerged, where both wear a collar to show their devotion to the other one and to their lifestyle. Yeah. Generally, the collars look like and are inscribed with vows to each other. Yeah, okay, I have not actually heard of joint collaring. That's new. Interesting. New to me, anyway. I've been out of touch with this stuff for a very long time. The three collars come from the traditions of the three rings of a formal relationship: the promise ring, the betrothal ring, and the wedding ring. Yep, I remember that, but I actually completely forgot about that. Oh, jeez. The training collar, formal collar, house collar. Like I said, I was mentioning some stuff. I don't really feel comfortable just going into all this stuff. But for BDSM, alternative relationship, it heavily focuses around, my knowledge heavily focuses around stuff that is involving BDSM. Now, outside of that, if there's anything else that I remember that is important, I will bring it up. But for the most part, I think I've said everything that is actually important here. Proper etiquette Yep, that's a must. Now, I want to throw something out here that will probably surprise you, because I looked a little bit into gore, Gor. That started off with fantasy novels that has extended to real life, but how far I couldn't tell you. All I know is that basically men are in charge and women are slaves. Some people want to make that be a reality. I don't think that's healthy. I find it interesting. Now, I'm probably just going to let that be. I will throw that out there because power relationships and power dynamics are a thing. You cannot go through life and expect that things are only ever going to be one way, especially with relationships. Now, if you set up a relationship to be one way with you and someone else, that is totally up to you and them, that person. Now, I've heard of some very interesting things as well that was shared. I don't know if I'll be able to find it again, but wow, it was crazy. In short, I just remembered this. In short, apparently, oh man, I might actually have to find the link for it, but this was shared by someone named Victor, and it was going into the Roman times, how there was some sort of formal process where, like, some of the elders would be courting the younger men, taking them under the wing and educating them and all that. But it was far more educated and advanced than just simply wanting sex. Wow, what was it? I can't remember. I do not know if that had an impact on the church back in the day, but I do know that it was seen as in a very polite, respectful way, where the older man would actually try to woo the younger man. Or rather, when I say younger man, I meant more like 14, 15-year-old. Age differences were very much different back then. Oh man, if I can find it, I will add it to it because that really interested me. It actually kind of was revolting at first, but once I read into it, I was like, wow, there's a whole entire system there. Yeah, very interesting. Not something I'd ever come across before. But apparently it probably was before the Roman times too, but yeah, I'll see if I can find it at it. Anyway, moving on. Alright, I was talking about colors. Let's see. Then I mentioned gore, yeah, that's right. So here's the thing. What set me apart from everyone else was the fact that I was looking for a relationship and love, not for play, not for sex. Now, that's partly because I knew a relationship always lasted longer if it was built on actual healthy qualities and not just looks and not just feelings. Relationships will fall apart if you're basing on one or the other or both. They just don't last. And as far as I know, they've never lasted that way. Alright, moving on. Yes, a color is not something you collect. Relationships are not something that you collect. And if you are with someone who constantly talks about their past relationships, that's a red flag. Because they're not looking for something long-term or sincere. Now, if they are comparing you to others in your past, that's a different story. That's another red flag. There's expectations placed upon you whether you know it or not. And that's something that you need to be wary of. Now, in a marriage, that can actually happen as well. Simply because expectations can be passed down from grandparents or from parents to you or to your partner. Now, traditionalism is heavily involved with that and plays a very big role in that. I'm not going to say it's healthy and I'm not going to say it's right, but some things are what they are. And they come along with the relationship itself or come along built into the relationship without you recognizing or realizing it. Alright. Is there anything else? Nope, just same-sex relationships. Now, for me, as I've told others when I was looking into this, now I did link down below with marriage about what was his name? Matthew Vines with his transcript. I linked it for marriage, so I would recommend you to go take a look at that video as well. Part one, because down below there's a link to both his site and the video itself. Now, I believe there's a difference between same-sex and homosexuality. One is built upon commitment in a relationship, and the other one is built upon sexual activities within the same sex. There's no focus on safety. There's no focus on the relationship or commitment or anything that is healthy. It's just basically focused on sex and more of it. The pursuit of sex and not the relationship. That's another big difference. However, I can't really talk too much about that. All I can say is that looking into this made me realize, when talking to multiple individuals, just the fact that there is a depth there that the church does not talk about or acknowledge, to my understanding. Now, most people want to simply throw this under it's wrong and it's evil and sinful, and they just leave it be, and they never actually look into it or explore it, and they never try to compare it up with what God actually says in the Bible. Now, so the Bible verse is saying man shall not sleep with man, or sleeping with relatives or cousins and all that. It matters. Now, this goes back to why I said marriage is a standard and why this is actually important. Now, there are some studies done with I don't remember by who, but I remember watching them talking about the issues with within Muslims and being married to the second and third cousins, and the issues that were run into it just because of genetic issues. There's also another video I watched as well. I will try to find it and link it as well, just because it's incredibly important. But it was like I'm trying to remember what it was. It was a focus on the issues that were found within these intermarriages, between the family members back years ago, with like kings marrying their cousins and sisters and stuff, and all the issues that had popped up in between. In short, if the genetic material is very similar to each other, there's going to be multiple issues popping up. That's, in the kids. So that's one of the reasons why you want to avoid all of that. It's because genetically the material just breaks down. All right. Everyone wants to be talking about the activities within a same-sex relationship, and I can't really talk about that just because A, censorship, and B, I don't really know. I have some friends who they call themselves gay, and they're in a same-sex relationship, and they're very much committed. Now, I want to say that there's a lot there that I wish I could talk about, and I either can't or I don't know how to talk about it. I just want to say that, for the most part, their norm is different than other people's norm, either because they grew up attaching to the wrong values, they grew up and were changed through trauma, through issues and problems that hit them that they were never able to get around or to overcome, and they just ended up being a certain way. So when I say that their norm is different than everyone else's norm, I don't know what degree would be considered unhealthy or healthy, so I can't really say that I know where that lies. I don't. Now, there's another video I'd like to point you back to, as far as the one I did about, same-sex relationships. These are found in nature, but it's usually with the point of deceiving predators. That's not the case here with humans. There's no deception there. Not like that. Maybe you're trying to deceive a spouse, try to be in multiple marriages, but that has worked up to a couple of years, and then it was found out, and to my knowledge, The only ones who ever did that were guys. I don't know of any women who hopped around being married to multiple men. Maybe that exists. Now, in short, there's a lot of reasons why people would be growing up differently or being changed to the point where who they were no longer applies. So that means, for whatever reason, their standards and values have also changed. Now, they could have gone down a route where who they were, okay, see if I can put this into words here. Maybe something happened where they realized things they were not seeing before. This is important because when changes are made, there's usually a story behind it. There's usually a story or events behind it that they can point to. Now, if it's natural, it's going to be a heck of a lot harder to find that, simply because the change itself is something that was built into them, not something that was circumstantial or on the outside. In all of my time with looking into same-sex relationships, I had more and more questions, and I was finding more and more faults with people just lumping same-sex relationships under homosexuality, as if they were all one and the same. To be honest, I want to say, this is a little bit of a stretch here, but bear with me. There are some things that seem to verify the fact that same-sex relationships are something that you can find in a normal society. Hang on one sec. Normal environment, not society. I think within a society there will always be those who do not conform to other standards. But in an environment, no, I already covered that. But like I said, this thing that I found, this is a slight change here. It's just adding more information to it. So when it comes down to what do they call those devices? A prostate massager. They have other words for it, but that is like the official term. One of the official terms for it is something that is used to help out with issues that men usually have in their 40s and 50s and all that with their prostates. And the idea of dealing with that particular ball, so to speak, because that's what the shape of the prostate is in, not of itself, but the part that the prostate massager deals with. So in short, dealing with, I'm trying to link these two together so it's not coming off wrong. The idea of taking care of your health. Oh man, how do I link these two together? This is the problem with doing things unscripted without like going off a script, is when little things pop up that are of interest, I generally just like, oh wow, okay, this is interesting, let's go into that. But with a prostate massager, I'm simply trying to say that dealing with your health can take you down roads you never expected or wanted to do so, because it's needed to deal with issues of your own that you're having. So what I'm trying to say is, just because something looks wrong and feels wrong but is needed for your health to prevent further issues down the road does not mean that it's actually wrong. It just was presented to you in such a way that you just negatively reacted to it. And your parents, tradition, your church just pounded it into you, reinforced that it was negative, that it was not positive in any way, shape, or form. The church is guilty of that, but even though they mean well, I recognize that many people in the church mean well. They never meant to deceive or to lie or to cause problems. So with that in mind, I want to say that recognizing some of these lies and issues is something that may take years. So, in short, and I'm wrapping this up with, this final thought on same-sex relationships and, homosexuality. There is far too little information to just simply say it is wrong, it is morally evil. The intent, I believe God, if there is a God. I have to speak for those who are not Christians as well as Christians. If there's a God and there's a creator, I believe he would be judging by intent, not just by the actions, the words, what was said and done. Like, you're going to condemn this is hypothetical, but it's happened in previous years, but are you going to condemn a man who stole bread to go feed his starving children just because he committed a crime? Yeah. In this particular case, are you going to condemn people being a certain way because they grew up being different than everyone else? I don't think we should, even if we could or can. Now, I don't believe what culture is doing is right either, by making those on the outside, the main influence. Like, this is what we should aspire to be. This is the relationship we should aspire to have. Because those who are bi, those who are quote-unquote gay, they're not what normal society is or has. Because as we all know, you have kids when a man and a woman gets together. All right? You don't have kids when the two of the same sex are together. So, on a biological level, that is normal. That is to be expected. So, it's best just simply only to judge what is in your life and whoever you are responsible for, whether they're pets, a partner, or kids. You don't want anything affecting them more than what is right or whatever is needed. All right. Thank you for bearing with me, and until next time.